When I first got into photography, not having any real classical training in it, I went out and did what you do these days when I was looking for a social way to meet other people who were into photography. I Googled it. I Googled Dallas and Camera Club, and I found the Dallas Camera Club. And over the years, as photography has become more and more a core component of my day-to-day life, one thing I've discovered to be extremely true, and it's probably true in a lot of other areas in life too, but it's definitely true in photography, and that's that if you want to make a go at it, if you want to get your name out there, and if you want to find out who else is out there, and if you want to find opportunity, it's all about networking. And so over the years, I've never been shy about going out and meeting other photographers, hanging out with other photographers, finding myself in situations where I get to interact with other people that work and exist in that realm. And tonight's guest speaker is definitely an example of how that can play out for the better. Back in May, June, earlier this year, you can tell we go way back. I got a text or a call from a referral from a friend to do some printing, and I met Michelle, tonight's speaker, and got to see her beautiful work, and actually got to print some of it for a show that was up in Richardson or Lake Dallas, over in Uptown, and unfortunately that show has come down, so it's not still up, but there'll be another show soon, I hope. It turns out that Michelle has done something that I think that we would all love to do right now if we could do it. And how he managed to pull this off, I'm still not entirely sure. She spent 18 months traveling the world. How many continents? Was it 5 continents over 18 months? Just traveling and seeing everything that you can find in that span of time. It's a remarkable. I mean, who here has been on a week's vacation or a 2 weeks vacation? Right? Oh, yeah. 3 weeks? Has anyone managed to pull off 3 weeks or taken a month's? When you get to that month level, you feel like you hit the big time, right? Or you take a summer off. But when you look back around at the same holidays from the last time, and you're still on that journey, that's the thing of dreams. So I'm really excited to have Michelle here tonight to share with us her travels, which I think you're going to love the pictures too, because that's the other thing. It's not only has she seen all these great places, but she did an amazing job of capturing what she saw as well. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Michelle and see where she goes. Where she takes us. All right.
Good evening. If y'all have trouble hearing me, just let me know because I don't project well.
You want the lights all the way down or like this?
I think this is good if it's okay with y'all.
Sure.
Or can we turn one off, or are they connected? Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Steve for connecting me to Kay, and Kay who couldn't be here tonight because he has the flu, for inviting me. It's so exciting to be in a room full of people, like photographers, who actually want to hear all this stuff, because you know what I'm talking about. Like, no one in your life wants to hear about, the 50 million things you have to say about one photo. So thank you so much. Yes, so as Steve said, I had the privilege of traveling for 18 months around the world. We went to 5 countries in 5 continents, 24 countries. This kind of outlines everywhere we went. How did this happen? My husband and I got sick and tired of life, and we had rat raced enough, and we decided we don't want to do this anymore. So we sold our house, our cars, and everything we owned, decided to travel. Initially, the trip was meant to be 10 months. And 7 months into it, we thought there's no way we're going to be able to stop in 3 months, so let's just go another year. Why not? So this is everywhere we went. as a photographer, having the opportunity to travel around the world, I mean, as you know, is not only a major privilege, but it's so exciting because you just think about all of the things you're going to photograph, and suddenly you have visions of grandeur of how everything you shoot is going to look like a National Geographic photo. At least that's where I was. And I knew exactly the types of shots I wanted, but I didn't really have a plan. I didn't, I wasn't set out with, like I'm going to shoot this type of thing, with this theme, or this idea. I didn't go into it like that. I just went into it with, whatever I can get, whatever's interesting, whatever's beautiful, I'm just going to shoot. I just wanted to go out there and collect images. I didn't really know what I wanted to do exactly. So what I had in mind, like I said, was very grand. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be able to photograph all of these beautiful things. I mean, Santorini is a place I always wanted to go. The blue domes of Santorini, oh my gosh, I'm going to get to photograph these things. Or dusty yellow photos of wild animals on safari. So excited to see myself out in that and capturing those images. The iconic buildings that I would be able to photograph. The Taj Mahal, of course. I mean, who doesn't know that's not Holland? That's Holland. The Eiffel Tower, of course. I've never been much of a landscape photographer, but I do every now and then get drawn to capturing some of these images. And I was very excited to go to some of these iconic places and photograph it. And the salt flats in Bolivia, which I had never actually heard of until we started researching for the trip. Also, never really a wildlife photographer, but I was kind of a photographer of all, jack of all trades for this trip, and I was just so excited we were going to get to see, the condors in Peru. I would get to photograph those. Cities of Europe at night or at dusk. Stunning sunset photos. Again, landscapes that hopefully would make you just want to linger and actually put yourself physically there. Animals. Again, I've never been much of an animal photographer, but every now and then you just get really comical things out of an animal. And I'm just going to let y'all sit on this one, and you'll take it in and figure out why this one's funny. Yes, it is. I thought maybe I would even be able to perhaps capture a little of the feeling of the history of a country. I love the juxtaposition of this horrible Soviet block housing against this very triumphant statue. Or maybe I would get to capture the mood generally associated with the place. I was excited to capture photos that would hopefully take a viewer's breath away. But I have to say, after taking many of these photos, these are kind of the iconic photos that I really wanted to capture, and I'm in no way comparing myself or putting myself up as some of the greatest photographers, but I was so excited to get these photos. But after a while, oh my God, did that get boring. Because there was nothing unique about those photos. There was nothing of me in them. I was just going out and looking for stereotypes in the work. They were interesting. I mean, they were pretty, but they weren't interesting. And that really started to bore me. It's like I was trying to prove something to myself, that by being able to replicate those photos, those types of photos I'd seen before, that I was proving that I was a worthy photographer. But really, I was just looking for cliches and stereotypes. Nowhere can you be met more clearly with what your stereotypes are than in Africa. If you need to really learn something about yourself, go to sub-Saharan Africa, because it will show you the truth of yourself. I was shown in Africa, even if just 2 weeks into the trip, thankfully 2 weeks into the trip, how my own perceptions of the way the world was, basically because of all of the images that I have been fed in my life, how very biased and prejudiced they were. And I have this story. So about 2 weeks into the trip, we were staying with friends in Nairobi. She wanted to take us to the market there, just the local market where everybody goes to collect the food for the day. And it's a beautiful place, and if any of you have traveled and been in these local markets, you know what I mean, because people actually live out of markets. They don't really live out of grocery stores like we do. So everything is heaping, you know, the colors are amazing, the smells are amazing, there's all this energy, and you know all this food came directly from the farmers near, in most cases, nearby. And so I was really overtaken by this whole scene, and I was just trying to figure out how am I going to capture the feeling or the mood, or how am I going to photograph this in a way that people back home can put themselves here. I wasn't really interacting with the people. I wasn't talking with them. I was just kind of in a daze of excitement walking around the market. And I saw this guy in a garlic stall, and he was laying out a layer of garlic from a big box. And it was really cool looking, and the light was coming in a certain way, and it was just the textures and everything was coming together. And so I just picked up my photo and I started shooting. Meanwhile, off to the left, there was a woman who started yelling at me. Stop, take our picture! I mean, really, really aggressively. And I was completely shocked and like a kid that had been slapped, you know? And I acted like that. I kind of walked away with my tail between my legs. But I was really bothered by it. I wasn't bothered that she yelled at me. I was bothered by my reaction to it. And I just couldn't figure out exactly what that was about. So it gave me a lot to think about. And what I discovered in that is that I really was approaching photographing the people there as though they were like animals on safari. I wasn't really interacting with them in any way. I wasn't trying to get to know them or learn anything from them. I wasn't engaging with them as a human. I was treating them as objects to be photographed, like trophies that I was going to take back home with me and display, really just as proof of my own adventurousness. It was a very disturbing sort of realization, but I'm so glad I had it, because it really changed how I approached photography on the trip. And like I said, Africa is really the best place to have this sort of experience, because you would never know from the way that I shot these are early on, that these are from 3 different countries, because I wasn't seeing them as any different. They're in Africa, but where? And what connotations am I giving off by photographing the people in these ways? And actually, I didn't realize when I shot that photo that that woman was holding a machete. It makes it a little more ominous. And I actually photographed that from a moving train. I couldn't believe I got it. So it was a really interesting experience to help me go deeper in learning about myself, because ultimately that's what travel does for us. We go out to learn about the world, we end up learning about ourselves, if we're doing it right. So what it also forced me to do was not only think about my own perspective and how I was approaching and seeing the world, but it also helped me kind of figure out what it is I wanted to photograph. Because like I said before, I went into it, I had no idea. I was just kind of, you know, going around like a kid, just. So how did I want to photograph? And the biggest thing was trying to communicate the way a place feels. Because you know, every place you go, whenever you go from Texas to California or just within the same country, it has a different feel to it. And when you travel internationally, that's even stronger. So this is kind of one of the things I started focusing on, is how to communicate the feeling that I felt in a place to a viewer, and how do I capture the mood of a place. So the photos became more about feelings than they did about the subject itself. And this is very freeing, because frees you of that, you're not stuck with the subject is, the person is the subject. Sometimes the person's not the subject. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. This photo was taken at Hell's Gate National Park in Kenya. And Hell's Gate National Park is located on Maasai land. So you have to have a Maasai guide. Maasai is one of the tribes, one of the 11 tribes of Kenya. They were the warrior tribe. And of course they still have their communities, but they're much diminished. So this was our guide. And as we were walking through this landscape, it's a very ancient landscape. And he's walking in front of us. And I just, he's walking in front of me and I'm thinking, he feels like the land. He feels like he belongs here, like he's so connected to it. And it was almost like the land was sort of holding him in embrace as he was standing there, walking through it. This as well, this is a funny story actually. The long train to Mombasa. It was a very long train ride. We decided to take this colonial era train from Nairobi to Mombasa on the coast. We thought it would be fun. We knew it's not the, it's not the most expedient way of getting from Nairobi to Mombasa, but that didn't matter. We had, we had 18 months for God's sake. So we decided to have this experience and take the train. It's supposed to be an 8-hour train ride. The drive, if you drive it, it's roughly 6 hours. So the night you get on the train, they serve you dinner, which is really cool because it's like old school, linens, and it's not really crystal, but it's supposed to look like crystal and all of that. So it's really like having this sort of historical experience, which is really neat. And we left, I think, 2 hours late, so we ate late. And then we went to bed, and they make up your bed, and it feels very luxurious, even though it's kind of dingy and worn down. And then the next morning, they serve us breakfast, and then we were supposed to arrive within a couple hours of breakfast to Mombasa, but this ended up taking 18 hours. This train ride. So we went 10 hours without food. I had a bottle of wine, but it didn't seem wise on an empty stomach to drink wine. So, I had a lot of time to photograph this train. You would think I would have gotten more photos, but this was the best one for sure. And I just kind of stuck my head out the window and was looking as we were coming around this bend, and I thought, this is how this train ride feels, infinite. Like it's just going off into it's never gonna end. And so that was really nice. Also, if y'all have any questions as I'm going, you don't have to wait, just pop out with them. I'm okay with that.
What was the reason it took you so long?
I have no idea. Actually, it's just one of those travel things that it just took forever. I don't know if they were going slower or we didn't stop, so I don't know what the problem was. So, again with the feelings, this also goes back to sort of how Africa is generally photographed and the images that we generally see that come out of that continent. We don't usually see, something done in this sort of way. Sometimes just using the light, it's like sculpting these two little girls in this photo, and this was one of those cases where I was supposed to be paying attention to the medicine woman who was giving us a demonstration, but all I could do was pay attention to them because the light was so beautiful and the way they were sitting, it was like I purposely composed them like that, and I didn't, it just happened. And that's one of the things I love about travel photography. You really have to be aware of what's going on around you, but you really start paying attention to things and stuff appears to you. And this is one of those cases. This is one of my favorite photos from the whole trip. And, but when I saw it later, after I'd photographed it, I was like, it almost looks like it could be a Rembrandt painting with the way the light is very much like the Dutch masters. I can't take credit for the light, but it's just beautiful. And this one as well. I will confess to y'all that I hated Santorini. Oh, I sound like a spoiled brat. We were there for 7 days. 7 days is too long to be in Santorini because it's nothing but a tourist trap. A very beautiful tourist trap. And I was so miserable that, and I do not do mornings, I don't do sunrises. You won't see a sunrise in, well, this is as close as I get to a sunrise because I am not a morning person. It's a good thing I don't want to do landscapes. And I was so fed up with the touristy side of Santorini and like how many times can you photograph blue domes? I mean, it's just the same thing over and over again. But one morning I decided, okay, I'm just gonna push through, I'm gonna get up early and I'm gonna do some of those iconic sunrise shots. And I just wasn't getting it. And I was irritated and the tourists were driving me crazy, and so I had kind of, at this point, it was later in the morning and it was too late for sunrise, and I was like, forget it, I'll just go down to the fort and I'll just hang out there by myself for a little while. And the fort is where, this is where this was taken, is where most of the tourists go to get their sunrise shots. So by the time I got there, it was dissipating and there weren't very many tourists left. Normally it's packed with tourists. And as I'm climbing the stairs up to this platform, I start hearing this string instrument music, and I was like, ooh, what is that? And I get up there, and there's this guy there playing what is called a bouzouki. I think I said that right. And it was so magical. It was just amazing. And I just stood there watching him for a while play, and I put some money in his bag, and then shot a couple photos. But I loved it because it was the first time something felt authentic to me in Santorini. And this authenticity is one of the reasons when we planned our trip, we planned it to avoid a lot of touristy places. There were a couple of exceptions, this being one of them. But I find it really, it's just sort of boring when you go to tourist places and you've seen this stuff already in pictures, and it can be a challenge as well to try and photograph the same thing from your own perspective. So this, I wanted the sun to, the sun flare in the photo because it was so important to that experience that I wanted the viewers to understand that as well.
You did it?
I gave him money, but not for the photo. I gave him money for the music. I generally don't do that for photos. I have one exception in here that I will show you. I also love making photos about using a lot of empty space in a photo to create this sort of feeling of questioning, like, what is this about? Why? Or, obviously where this is associated with some kind of a, I say it's a fishing village, but you would know that anyway. But the empty space there leaves some space for you to kind of linger and question, what kind of fish did they buy? And it's nice sometimes to have that empty space to give yourself a visual rest also. But there's some feeling of sort of aliveness in it, even though there's nothing alive in the photo. I really love that. Also capturing quiet moments. I started to realize as the trip went on that the photos that I really connected with were the quiet ones. And this is one example of that. This is in India, in a little town that actually is considered holy to Buddhists, Sikhs, and Hindus. And there's just, I would like to say that the town had this kind of holy feel to it, but to be honest, it didn't feel like that to me with all the barking dogs. But every now and then you would just experience something like this, like we're walking through a street and it's dusk and the light is making the blue feel like it's lit when it's not, it's just paint. But then you feel this warmth from the candlelight inside. The quiet moments where you can just kind of sit with an image and contemplate it. A similar thing here, but observing the mystery, being in a moment, we were in a Jeep, an open, a Jeep completely open, going through looking for tigers. I thought, oh my God, please tell me these guys have guns. We got within 3 feet of tiger. In fact, we saw 3, which is very unusual. We met a guy who said he had been there 5 times and never seen a tiger. So we got very lucky, but it was a little bit terrifying because it was very primal. Like, you realize there is nothing separating you from being dinner to that tiger. But it's really amazing. We're just driving through the park and, you know, you see amazing things. And then again, going back to objects, photographing objects in a way where they're alive and full of expectation. And this is another example of this. It's almost like you just missed something happening or something's about to happen, but it doesn't feel stagnant. And the interesting thing about this is actually in a temple where the people have ancestor worship. So they actually, they present the tea to the ancestors, who are represented by these in the back. I don't know, I can't remember if they actually have ashes in them or if they're just symbolic. And then of course, the way light can become your subject. Of course, this would be completely drab and boring without the light. And I do love capturing those feelings of, a lot of times they have no people in them, but there's something very alive in them. There's something, that really communicates the feeling of a place. But I did come to realize as the trip went on that it's really all about the people. Which was really challenging to me because I was terrified to take the pictures, especially after that little incident in Nairobi. So I had to get over my fear of people and rejection. Hold on 1 second.
So how did you do that?
I haven't yet.
She's working on it.
How's that? I'm still working on it. But even in photographing people, I didn't want it to just be, a simple portrait of an image of a person's face. I still wanted the feeling to come through of the place. And this is on the Nile, which I thought was so cool. We were actually on the Nile. We actually rafted down grade 4s on the Nile. It was pretty cool. But this man, I think he's actually a boy, he was just standing there on this rock and I was like, oh my God, I have to take a picture of that. The feeling. And it was just so perfect and so beautiful. And I will admit I cropped that, and I don't do a lot of that, but I did it on this one. Photographing dancing. I'm fascinated by dance. I would actually like to do a lot more of photographing dance because to get that, they're communicating emotion in a very nonverbal way, and through photography or communicating emotion in a nonverbal way. And to kind of put those two together to come up with something, to me it's very fascinating. And sometimes you just have to have a little bit of fun with it. I actually shot this with a GoPro. I did use several different types of cameras while on the trip. And we were snorkeling, and the snorkeling was not very good, but I got this photo out of it, so. Which I really like. It's kind of strange, and that's actually me, but and somebody else in the background. But I just liked it. I was like, it's kind of fun and weird, and the composition's all over the place. And again, the quiet moments. I wish the quality of some of these would have been better, but it was nighttime. Another quiet moment. Yes, I'm sorry.
Could you go back to your previous picture?
Sure. This one.
So you talked about the feelings and the necessity to sort of interact with your subjects to some extent. So taking this picture as an example, I mean, did you meet them, talk to them, anything that really was an interaction or kind of a communication between you as an artist
No, not with this one, because this was actually at a dance performance. So they were performing. I mean, we got to meet some of them at the end, but no, unfortunately, I did not always live up to my own ideals. Again, you know, I think with any kind of photography, but really with travel photography too, you really have to be very aware and observant and just kind of, you know, I tend to get lost. I can't read on a moving vehicle. And it was actually an advantage during our trip because, you know, like I was looking out the window of the bus in this picture. We were going from Uganda to Rwanda, and this guy was just hanging out, like chilling on his bike. And I believe these are actually taxi bikes, so maybe he's waiting for a fare. But I just loved how he was like, yeah, I'm just waiting, just, you know, checking things out. This is a lot of this when you travel and you realize that we are so high strung here in the US because we don't get a lot of this opportunity. Going back again to how you can learn about yourself. Even, you know, I found even in going back through the photos and the editing process is when I learned the most about myself. It didn't often happen while I was actually doing the photography, but when I would go back. And this photo, and I have a few other military photos also, this really, to me, showed me something about my sort of, I have to be real careful here, I don't want to offend anybody, but my sort of dislike of this sort of military ideal, military culture, in that the sort of removal of identity that happens through, you know, that is necessary to produce a military. And I noticed in a lot of my photos, I could see that. Yes? No, that's actually soldiers on both sides of the flag. It's the flag, actually, the Hungarian flag. And so, yeah, I started to notice that, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I didn't really recognize that about myself before. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Thank you. I love this photo. She was just sitting there in her booth. Yes, Steve?
So some of these moments look like they happen pretty quick, and so you've got to work quick. So I've got a two-part question.
Okay.
Part one, something like this happens, you can't go, wait, let me change lenses.
Right.
So what was your primary walk-around setup so that you knew you could get the variety of shots that you thought you were going to be faced with?
Oh, there's a second part?
Well, in the second...
Oh, I can answer that first, sorry. So I actually, because we were traveling very light, everything we had fit on our bodies in backpacks. I was at a dilemma when we first started the trip because at the time I had pretty much an amateur kind of kit. I think it was a Nikon D90. But it was still, you know, a DSLR. So I decided for the trip I was going to sell all my DSLR stuff and get a mirrorless system. And I regretted it every day because I needed something to be more compact. And of course, so I got a Sony A6000, very compact, very small. And then I also only traveled with one lens, and that was an 18 to 200 millimeter. So, because I figured with that, it covers pretty much everything. I could get fairly up close with the 18, and I could get some, you know, decent, you know, distance with the 200 millimeter. But that's all I had.
And then the second part is, what mode do you shoot in? Are you a manual shooter that you've got it, or?
So I think a lot of these that I did on the street, I think I was shooting in P. Because the conditions changed too much for me to shoot manual, completely manual. There was another question?
Yes. You didn't carry all your money with you, so how did you manage that?
We, normally we would pull out a certain amount of money when we would get to a country and exchange it, and then but we only carry a small amount around at a time, and we use credit cards whenever we could, which in some places was better. We were able to do that more than in others, but we pretty much use ATMs. We got a special account so that when we traveled, we didn't get charged for ATM fees. We just pulled it out when we needed it. Took some planning sometimes. I'm sorry?
You would have been robbed if you had a
Oh, yeah, no, we're very, very careful about how we plan so that we didn't have anything happen to us. Actually, we had one little thing I can tell you about later. But so I was in the market in Bodrum, Turkey, which is just on the coast across from Greece, and I was actually gathering food for a cooking class I was taking with a local woman, and we were in the market getting all of the vegetables, and I looked over and I saw this woman sitting there, and I was standing at this angle, and I was like, oh my God, please don't move, please don't move, please don't move. And I thought, if I put this camera to my face, it might draw attention to her. So, and I did do this some, and this also kind of goes against what I was saying earlier, but was kind of blind shooting. So I sort of lined myself up and then put the camera here and shot, and thought, well, hopefully I'll get something. And I got it. I couldn't believe it. It's a little bit out of focus, but it's one of my favorite photos too. I love photographing in religious places and capturing the sort of contemplation that happens there. And this is the Golden Temple in Amritsar, India, which is sort of like the Mecca for Sikhs. And you can see the people there lined up to go into that gold temple, which is actually made out of gold. And it was an amazing experience. Everything we learned about the Sikh religion was so beautiful. In this temple, they feed 100,000 people every day for free. It's amazing. They have on a hall volunteer staff, they have an amazing kitchen with massive, I mean, you can go and tour the kitchen, and everybody eats on the floor, and it doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, whatever. It's very egalitarian. And it was an amazing experience to go in there, grab a tray, have some food given to you, sit on the floor next to everybody else, and eat. It's really beautiful. Lots of rickshaw riding in India. So we spent 9 weeks in India, and it is impossible to be bored in India. Impossible. This was in Himachal Pradesh, which is in the northern part of India where the Dalai Lama is based. And so there are a lot of monks walking around. We were out for a hike one day, and these monks came in, and I just sort of loved how cinematic this one felt. This was our guide on a hike.
Was India difficult for you?
India, you have to completely suspend everything that you believe and know in life to be able to deal with India. If you travel like we did, which was budget. If you travel high end, it's amazing, but I don't know if I would necessarily call it India. By the time we were done with India, I had this thing where I would say, India will break your heart and make you fall in love all in the same minute, because it is like that. But you really have to go in there willing to suspend everything, like your expectations about how things should run, about everything. And if you can do that, you'll have an amazing time in India. Yes? Well, this thing. This is an example. So we were walking up. We wanted to go to this temple. And there are lots of temples in India. I don't remember the temple. But we got out of the taxi, and it was the most disgusting scene I had ever seen. I mean, both my husband and I were like about to turn around and get back in the car. It was so gross. There was trash everywhere. There were pigs and dogs eating the trash. There was monkeys all over the place. Everything about it just felt bad. We decided to go ahead. We pushed on, and there were these two very large, wide ramps going up. and we were walking up, and on the side of one of the ramps was a family. I'm assuming the man was a snake charmer, which is why he had this cobra. And he pulled the cobra out and he put it on the baby. I'm calling it a baby. He's probably, I mean, he might be 1 or 2. And it was so jarring and it terrified me. And then the baby proceeded to put them out, the snake, you know, I mean, he's a 2-year-old, he's gonna put everything in his mouth. So just started to put the snake in his mouth. Or her mouth, I'm not sure. This is a boy or girl. But it was really shocking. And this photo is not actually in my portfolio because I feel very conflicted about this photo. I paid for this photo, and this is one of only maybe 3 photos from the whole trip that I actually paid for. And the only reason I did is because I took the photo without thinking, first of all. I was so shocked by it, my automatic reaction was to photograph it. And then I realized what I had done and thought, well, it's sort of an expectation of the man that you would pay for the service. And so I'm very conflicted about this photo. I don't agree with paying for photos, and yeah, it's very disturbing. But you see a lot of this sort of thing in India. And I didn't feel like, from what I had heard about India, that we had experienced that much of it. Like, people would talk about kids living on the street, people going to the bathroom on the street and stuff like that. And we didn't see a lot of that. I mean, of course, there's trash everywhere, and there's animals all over the place, and the dogs, it's very loud, and it's chaotic, and it's crazy. But yeah, this is one example of that. And I love this photo, but I will admit that this is sort of my own kind of Western feminist interpretation of this photo, is that this is very India, and how the women are very trapped and the men are very, you know, it's their world. So they can just lay back and enjoy it. Now, like I said, I'm just putting it's my own interpretation on it. But it's a good example of how when we carry our own beliefs or our own sort of set of values into another country, how that can affect how we photograph and what we photograph. I don't know that this would have been as interesting to me if I hadn't carried that baggage into that train with me. Also, this was taken with an iPhone, because sometimes my camera wasn't accessible, so my iPhone was right there all the time. And I looked up I was up on the top bunk in the train from taking a nap, and I saw this, and I was like, I have to photograph it, but I'm not gonna be able to get my camera out of time, so. Even though this is technically not a very good photo, but I still really like it.
You've had several pictures that you've shown where you basically had 2 pictures within a frame. Mm-hmm. Do you do that intentionally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes I feel like it really adds to the photo. It doesn't work with every photo, but with some compositions, it really works well. Like the guide, I felt like that really worked with that, especially because he was holding a stick. So it was sort of like a lot of lines and divisions, and it didn't feel like it didn't belong.
Like your tunnel picture with the tigers, it was very much like a tree on one side and keep coming through the dusty side.
Yeah. Yeah. This was also on the train in India. The train in India was a great place to photograph. Vendors will come on when the train stops, and they'll come in and sell stuff, or this guy was just wanting money for his performance. And he just looked so passionate about it. I love that. How am I doing in time? I forgot to stop my timer. You okay? Okay. You know, when I first went into India, I went in there wanting to photograph it. You know, like you see all these photos of India with all this color, and I was like, that's what I'm gonna do. But like I said earlier, I learned soon that I actually wasn't interested in that. I've seen it, and so if it's there, but I'm not gonna actually set out to do it. I love this. We were coming back from the Pakistan-India border, and every night at the Pakistan-Indian border, they close the border, and it's a huge party. I mean, they have rows and rows of bleachers on both sides where people come and they just celebrate, and they take the flags down exactly at the same time, and the Indian guards do this very elaborate like high kick. They walk very fast, and it was really, really cool. It was like a street party on the India side, not so much on the Pakistan side. So this woman was so funny. This was in Myanmar, and I think she was about 90 years old, and she smoked these cigars, which were, a lot of what was in them was really sawdust, but there was a little bit of tobacco in there, I think. And we couldn't really speak to her, but her granddaughter was there, so we had an interpreter. And she was just so funny and so, talking about her husband and so proud of her family. And then she offered me the cigar, and I don't smoke, so pro tip. Never smoke handmade cigars with a 90-year-old Burmese woman. She was laughing at me. I couldn't handle it. Myanmar was one of my favorite countries. It was so amazing because the people were not tourist weary yet. So they didn't see you as a walking dollar bill like they do in Thailand. And they were still very interested in you, as interested as you were in them. And they were so hospitable. We had amazing interactions in Myanmar. We were out on a hike one day, just a day hike, and we came across this house, and there were a bunch of people out with a big sheet on the ground, and there was food everywhere, and there were a couple people gathered, and our guide said they were invited us to sit down with them and have some food with them. And we were like, wow, yeah, of course, this is why we travel. And so we got to talking to them, and apparently in rural Myanmar in particular, when a family has a very productive harvest that year, they share it with whomever comes across or with the village. So that's what they were doing. They had a very productive harvest for the year. This is a traditional makeup that they wear in Myanmar, and boys as well as girls wear it. There are all kinds of theories that it's like a sunscreen or mosquito repellent. I don't know, but it's really cool. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that as they westernize and open up more, that they're losing. And this, I love this photo. She was just standing like that. I'm not kidding, when I came across her. And in fact, I asked our guide to please ask her not to move. Can I take her photo? And please tell her don't move. Because she was standing like she was walking down the red carpet. And I thought, this is fantastic. Here she is digging up potatoes, but she looks so glamorous. It's great. No, we often did not have guides, but in Myanmar, nobody speaks English. So when we went, we did a couple of treks, and we also have friends that live in Yangon. So we, the guy is American and the woman is Burmese, but yeah, there we had to have a guide. This is also in Myanmar. This is a group of people called the Pa'o. And during the trek that we went on, because we did this trek from a town all the way to the lake, and we went through all these rural villages and ran into all kinds of different groups of people that I never knew about. And we were walking, we got to one village after hiking all day, and I was just walking around the village, and this woman on the left came outside her house and she, was inviting us in to come in. Our guide wasn't with us, so we couldn't actually talk to them. But they had us sit there, and this is their kitchen in their house, and it was so amazing. The other women didn't want to be photographed, so they turned away from me. But the woman on the left was like, take my photo, take my photo. That happened a couple of times. This, I actually had a hard time. I thought about putting this one with the places because it has such a feel to it also. But ultimately I felt it was really about the people, well, the person and the buffalo. But they would take the buffalo to this watering hole every day in the evening to let them bathe or drink. Chinese markets are always interesting. This is the Chinese market in Yangon, and everything, every part of the pig you can imagine that we would normally not eat is right there. I didn't eat any of it. My husband did, not me. This is in Shwedagon Pagoda, which is the biggest Buddhist temple in Myanmar, maybe in the world. This is another example of, it's nothing in focus in this photo, but I just love this photo. We were walking down a street and there was just this like almost a hole in the wall where this guy was there chopping up meat. And I had to do it with my iPhone. Actually, I think I took it with my husband's iPhone. I don't even think I had mine with me. Yeah, again, that sort of divided composition. But there's something about it I like. It's sort of like you're stealing a moment, or they're stealing a moment. You're kind of, it's almost voyeuristic. So after I shot this, later I looked at it and I thought, this feels very aggressive to me. It was just a changing of the guard. But again, that whole thing of my perception of military started to come through for me. So, this is what's called Cholita wrestling. And it is hilarious. It's totally put on, and it's like WWF. I know it's not called WWF anymore, but it's totally fake, and it's kind of like, I mean, but it's hilarious, especially after you've been in Bolivia for a while. This was at the end of our trip in Bolivia, and Bolivia was another one of those countries. It was one of my favorite countries. Because you see cholitas, and it's not a derogatory term there. It's the word used for the indigenous women, and they're very, very small. They wear these amazing hats and braids and dresses like this. But they do not, they're very standoffish. I never was able to interact with any of them, and I don't have any photographs of any of them. But in La Paz, they have cholita wrestling. And so I guess these cholitas are a little bit more outgoing. And so we went to one, and they were just throwing each other around by the braids, but I mean, it was just, it was hilarious, but also really amazing to see at the same time.
It's like WWE.
Yes, exactly like that. And I put these two together because they kind of sort of need each other to tell the whole story. This was also sort of a stolen photo, I have to admit, because we were at a festival that's done every year outside this little town we were staying in, and the indigenous people in Bolivia still make up the majority of the population, and they are quite marginalized, and they really do not trust outsiders. So it's very difficult to interact with them. But every year they have a big festival to Mother Earth. And it's really for them, it's not a tourist attraction, but now that it's been going on, tourists hear about it, they flock there. And it was crazy crowded. They do a parade, and all of the different sort of, I don't think they're called tribes, maybe clans around Bolivia come, and they do a demonstration of their dance, of their clothing, the music. It's really fascinating. And there was a break in the parade, and I kind of just jumped out into the street and got this photo. And I felt a little bit guilty about it later, but here it is. So, but it was just one of those really exciting moments where I wish the photo had been better quality, but I had to just do it like that. Again, more military. The thing that was interesting about this one, actually I think these were police women, but what was so interesting and unique about this one is it was all women, and it was part of a parade of police and military in Bolivia. All around the world, people show off their militaries in a way that we don't. It's really interesting. Again, another one. In Peru, it was really interesting because they had had so much history with violence and terrorism, internal terrorism, that they are very much, the military is very much separated from the people. And they do this demonstration every day outside the palace, but you can't access it. You're left behind a huge gate. And I just thought that was really interesting, how they were sort of maybe meant to protect the people, but very much disconnected from the people. I have to tell you, Europe bores me to tears. Photographically, we were there for 3 months. I hardly took any photos because it was so boring. I mean, it's just, you know, it's Europe and everything's beautiful and you've seen it all a million times. So it's a challenge to see it from another perspective. This was an interesting one though. At the top of Notre Dame, the workers were up there. The thing that's interesting about Europe is that it kind of, because I was so disinterested in everything visually, that it forced me to do things a little differently. Hopefully I'll have time to get to that. Sevilla is one of my favorite places on earth. I just love flamenco. I don't know why this woman was sitting under this table, but she was there making something from yarn. So this is actually cannabis they harvest in Morocco. Cannabis is illegal in Morocco, but there is a region that grows it and exports it. They make hashish out of it. It's not like, they don't not like the herb, not like marijuana. It's more like a powder. I did not partake. Little girl was adamant that I photograph her. She was following me around the whole time, like telling me to photograph her. And I've got this really great photograph of her jumping rope.
Michelle, if you could go back and do it again, is there anything fundamentally that you would do differently, knowing what you knew after it all?
I would go slower. The first 10 months we were moving every week or two. And you know, when you're planning a trip like that, you think, oh wow, a week in one place seems like a long time. By 10 months, I was exhausted. So that would probably be the main thing. And also, I would not have changed my camera system. Changing your camera system right before you go and you have no experience with it, bad idea. This is at the Cowheads Market. They actually don't allow photography. I was being bad. But I'm now a vegetarian, but I can tell you the cheek out of that cowhead was the most delicious meat I've ever had in my life.
Wow.
Yes.
Yes, could you comment on your compositional philosophy? I've noticed that many of your images have your subject almost in the dead center, for example. Not all, of course. And many of them, they're not looking at you either. There are a lot of people's backs and so forth that you photograph. Can you just sort of comment about how that is incorporated into your style?
Well, I don't follow rules, generally. I just kind of approach every photograph as its own thing. I do sometimes. Kind of sometimes, like with this one, I just cut her head off because it was very interesting. A lot of times I just do whatever I feel is most interesting to the image. Sometimes the balance, the way the person is in their environment requires, you know, a dead-on symmetry because of the balance of the feel of the place. Sometimes the place is chaotic and maybe I want to communicate that through the composition. So it's really, every time I shoot, it's different. It also depends on how I'm feeling for the day, because sometimes I get bored and I'm like, I'm just so tired of all of this, and I'll shoot blind or just do really crazy stuff, and sometimes you get really great results that way.
What kind of equipment did you carry around so that you could bring all your photos home? Did you have like a jillion flashcards?
No, this is it. Unfortunately, this is another mistake I made. I didn't shoot in RAW, and I wish I had shot in RAW. But on a trip that long, I just thought I'm not going to have storage capacity to shoot in RAW, so I shot everything in JPEG. But this is it. I uploaded everything. I had a couple of external hard drives. In fact, when we were in South Africa toward the end of our trip, I had to buy another external hard drive, another terabyte, but very light. So here, this is a small section of abstracts that I shot. I also like to call this "Or I Got Bored," because like I said, especially after this, sometimes you just need to do something completely different. So I did some very abstract stuff too. Some of it I really like. Santorini Abstract 1, there are 7. Santorini Abstract 7. Yeah, remember I said I didn't like Santorini? If you've ever been to Venice, you know the pigeons are like their own monument. Sometimes you have to be funny. Some days are like that. And this is in the salt flats. It's amazing because you cannot tell the difference between the land and the sky because the salt is so white and it just blends into the sky.
Is that salt flats where there's just a little bit of water?
Yes. Unfortunately, we weren't there that time of year. Yeah. It's amazing. The perspective is really fun to play with. This is somewhere in Peru. This is the only one I didn't remember where we were because we were on a bus in the middle of nowhere. Amsterdam. If you've ever been to Amsterdam, wow, the bikes. It's amazing.
Canals are full of bikes thrown in there accidentally.
Europe gave me a lot of abstracts. I find they're more interesting too, but just toward the end of the trip I started doing more stuff like this and I thought, well, if I had more time, maybe my work would turn to this. So some of you were asking about equipment. So I had to travel very light. So I started with a Sony a6000 body, an 18 to 200 millimeter lens, and a flash.
Is that a mirrorless?
It is a mirrorless system. I don't think I ever used the flash. It was very small, but I don't think I ever used it. I had my iPhone and my GoPro. And then, funny story, that Sony a6000 did not like the Amazon jungle. It died. So I had to replace it. We were in Bolivia, and we had this torrential downpour. My son liked to describe it as like a lake was dumped on us. We had no warning. Fortunately, I had time to wrap up the camera, but what I didn't anticipate was the humidity that would build up inside the camera. This camera is not weatherproof, even close. So it died. So we went, when we were in La Paz, I thought, surely there's a Nikon store somewhere in La Paz. Nope. Not in the whole country of Bolivia. You have to go to the black market, which sounded very scary. But it wasn't. The only thing is that I paid too much for this A3500, which you cannot buy anymore, not even on eBay. I tried to sell it on eBay, I couldn't even sell it. So when I got back to the States, I switched. I got a Nikon D7200 because it's weather resistant. I learned fast. And so I took a very small amount of equipment. The speed lights, I think, were pretty much a waste of space. And you know, the lens is not ideal, as all of you know. These range of lenses do not have the best quality, but what I needed was, my main concern was small. My main concern was having it to be small because it had to fit in that bag, and that's a small bag. And that's me on a forest canopy in Rwanda.
You never used a tripod?
No. No, and there were probably, I actually initially took a tripod, a travel tripod with me, and I never used it. And so we ended up having to go back to the US in the first few months of our trip, and I just left it.
Did that also include your clothing and everything?
No, I'll get to that. No, it didn't include my clothing. But all my camera equipment and my day stuff had to fit in there. So my passport, if I took a book, that kind of stuff. So the other stuff, we took approximately 5 days worth of clothing. That's it.
Wow.
This is what I took. And for the women out there, you will greatly appreciate the lack of toiletries I took. But I will say my hair was ravaged by the end of the trip, and that's why my hair's short now. I had to cut it all off. But it was liberating to be able to travel this light, and because it had to fit in there. That was my bag.
Wow.
So I had that bag and my camera bag, and that was it. By the end of the trip, that bag bulged a little bit more. I had stuff hanging on the outside of it. So.
Did you need any like a cover or anything?
No, well, and I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but we actually planned the itinerary to go with the weather because we couldn't take anything heavy. So I had a pair of silk long johns because they're very compact, but we had no coat, nothing like that. Now we did we had to make some itinerary changes at one point, and we ended up in Eastern Europe in October unexpectedly, and the weather was unusually cold, so we ended up having to buy coats while we were there. But then we ended up giving them away when we went to India. So, yeah. But mostly we just bought, you know, like thin Under Armour things that you can wear and layer, because we just couldn't take coats. And that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Steve?
So how's that altered your approach to photography now that you're back in a day-to-day life in the United States?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It actually gave me confidence because before the trip, I had been doing photography for a long time. I studied it in high school and went to college for it, even though I ended up giving up on it. At one point, I had done some fine art photography, but the main thing I was lacking before was confidence, and that was the confidence to just do it, even if I thought I was going to be criticized for not being good or not comparing to whatever. It also established a sort of discipline and just getting used to photographing every day. That was the other thing I was lacking before. And I also am more interested in people now. Before, I probably would not, I would have told you there's no way I will ever do portraits. And now I'm a headshot photographer here. That's, you know, when I'm building a business I'm building. So it gave me more of an appreciation for interacting with people and just the discipline, establishing the discipline to do it.
Is your husband a photographer? Because sometimes it's hard to know a photographer.
My husband is a finance guy, so that's a very interesting mixture, let me tell you. No, he's not a photographer. He's not a visual person at all. So, but he's very supportive.
Did you say your son?
Yes,
Did he go?
he did. Yeah, he was 10 when we started the trip, and then 11 and a half when we finished, and it was an amazing experience for him. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Just in terms of the photos you showed us, what would you guess would be the average amount of time you spend post-processing?
I hate post-processing, right? Steve knows. I hate it. So, and also because of the training I had, it was pre-digital, so it was all about doing everything in the camera. So I mean, sifting through the thousands of photographs that I would take, or hundreds of photographs that I would take in a day, probably took the longest. But as far as post-processing goes, I do very little. Obviously with headshots, I do, what needs to be done there. But with this, very little. I generally don't crop them, although there were some exceptions. I don't do any photo manipulation, anything like that. I just kind of keep them as they are. Most of what I did was resizing and transferring and all of that kind of stuff. I don't know how much time that took me. Yes?
So Steve said you had an exhibit,
Mm-hmm.
and I was wondering, shooting with the smaller scale, did you have any, how large did you make your prints? Did you have any issues with
Blowing them up?
using, yeah.
No, I think I printed them at 16 by 20, I think is what the dimension was, and I don't remember why I picked that. Might have been the biggest I could get, the lowest resolution one. Yeah, it was like the one in India on the train with the woman on one side, the man on the other. I took that with my iPhone, and that one was probably the lowest resolution, and it printed okay. I mean, it was acceptable at 16 by 20, but I wouldn't have been able to go any higher with it.
And then at the end of each day, you try to review your photos.
Yes.
Did you actually cut or delete?
Yes. I did delete a lot.
As you went?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I would delete anything that was an automatic no, and I was pretty harsh because I just didn't have the space to be wishy-washy. That was probably another advantage to it, is it really forced me to hone my editing and just become more, just more honest in what I was looking for. So, yeah, I was really good at the beginning of the trip through most of the trip at going through and editing and cutting things out, but toward the end, I think I just got too tired. Yes.
I was going to ask, of all the places you went, what was your most favorite, and what was your least favorite country you went to?
So least favorite's easy. Thailand was my least favorite. And it's maybe not fair because we were only there 2 weeks. That sounds ridiculous to say, we were only there 2 weeks, but, and we did a lot of touristy things in Thailand. But I just felt like it was really hard to have authentic experiences there because there's such a history of tourism. So, I mean, I would maybe be willing to give it another shot. It is beautiful. But that's just, for me, it's just not enough for a place to just be beautiful. And then my favorite, I can't really tell you my favorite. I can tell you my 3 favorite. And that's Myanmar, Bolivia, and Romania. And I didn't actually have any pictures from Romania in here, but we were only there a few days.
I think you did have 1 or 2, but it was the one that was called the
Oh, Transylvania, that's right. Yeah, and we were there for Halloween. With my son, we had to kind of change things up at the last minute, and we're like, well, let's go to Transylvania for Halloween. So, but yeah, and all 3 of those places have one thing in common, and it is that they still have a very distinct culture, and they haven't yet been swept by American Western culture. They still have their costumes and their traditions, and you can really feel it when you're there. And a lot of the places you go, like we're in Italy, and why am I hearing Hotel California being played on a guitar in the square in Italy, the birth of opera? I mean, the birthplace of opera. So it's that sort of thing. Yeah.
Do you have any trouble with being an American or being a tourist or whatever, political unrest, strikes?
No.
That kind of thing?
Actually, we didn't. In fact, most of what we received was like love. It was really amazing. People just hear you're American and automatically they're like, oh, America, it's so great, I love you. I'm not kidding. It really was like that. And, the only place we sort of got pushed back a little bit was in Bolivia because their government is really antagonistic toward the US. But we didn't have that on a person-to-person level. That was more like, on the governmental level. But no, actually surprising, we didn't have that. And that was always in our mind, In fact, we always joke that maybe we should just tell people we're Canadian. It's not our, it's not a unique joke, but yeah, no trouble. In fact, the only trouble we had on the entire trip was getting some laundry stolen in Rwanda. That's it. But considering how long we were traveling, we never had, a theft or money stolen or anything. I just think the idea that the world is really dangerous is sort of overblown. I don't think it's really like that. And that's one of the things we wanted to find out. One of the things we wanted to know by this trip is, what is the world really like? I can't believe all these things that I'm told, because I just don't believe that people are like that everywhere. And that wasn't our experience at all. It was really a really great experience and really good for our son, because he got to see that too. And sort of like learning the truth about, like, hi, I know something, got one up on somebody.
So are you making a living as a photographer now?
I'm sorry?
Are you working as a photographer?
I am. I wouldn't say I'm making a living at it yet. I'm getting there. Yeah, I'm doing mostly headshots, but portraits, mostly individual, but for business and actors and models, and things like that. So I really enjoy it. Actually, I'm surprised, but I actually love it.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you.